people object to the framing that America's going down. I don't want to be blackpilled because I'm not. I'm very optimistic about the future. But there's a million different ways that the US could tip into turmoil right now. They're all low probability, but when they stack up, all these things seem to get so overwhelming that something's going to happen. What are some of the tipping points you see coming?
People are benumbed from the events of the 2020s to the point where any of these things at any other time in history would probably be a much bigger deal than they are. But the fact that there's an entire list of them, which I'm going to run through here, obviously 2023 had the second, third, and fourth largest banking crisis in the history of the US. Okay? More banking failures are coming. Okay, well, how's that going to be fixed? Well, what's likely to happen is a lot of people are going to lose money and they're going to print more money to cover depositors, right? So that there isn't like a massive French Revolution kind of uprising. So banking crisis, 34 trillion in debt. What does that even mean? A trillion seconds ago is 30,000 years ago. So there's $34 trillion of essentially excess spending that has piled up over the last 20, 40 years. Obviously, stocks are at the highest valuations in history. Most of the gains and most of the stock market is being held up by 7 big tech stocks. How long is that supposed to last? We don't know, right? What history says is things that go that far out of whack will come back into a sort of normal range at some point. Risk of hyperinflation. How much money is the government going to print to keep this whole game going, right? Like exactly where is the upper bound of that? Wealth confiscation, when the government gets bankrupt and desperate and people are restless, right? They tend to steal stuff. And why would that be out of the realm of possibility? Obviously, they can get their hands on a lot of people's 401ks and IRAs, massive tax audits. The IRS is openly admitting they're hiring 87,000 new agents and giving some of them guns and firearms training. Well, why are they doing that? What's that for? The IRS is only to take money from people inside the United States. Escalation of wars, obviously, this is very serious. This is much more serious than people realize. An all-out war with Russia is potentially the end of humanity. And what is NATO doing except poking Russia in the eye over and over again with their stupid policies? China, the Middle East, we're running around like bully looking for somebody to take us down a peg.
Biden, last quote about the Houthis. He said, is the bombing working? No. Are we going to keep doing it? Yes. That's American policy in one sentence.
Political prosecutions or persecutions, if you will, obviously. Whatever you think of Trump, the idea that the DOJ and the FBI have been weaponized against a candidate who's challenging to win the highest office is a very bad sign. This is what very seriously defunct, dysfunctional banana republics do. New pandemic lockdowns, this dopey WHO wants to somehow take the sovereignty of all nations and tell people what they can and can't do. Possibility of climate change lockdowns, which is the biggest asinine scam ever, quite frankly. But they've sold a lot of, especially the younger population, on the idea that no, you have to stay within a 15-minute city while we fly in private jets, right, to go tell you what bugs you're going to eat for the next few years.
Well, and they've destroyed people's mental health with the climate change fear. People just starting out their lives. These are kids, and you're telling them the world's going to end because of these bad people.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
They've got a brainwash from a young age. So the anxiety levels are through the roof on some of these kids because they literally think the world's ending when it's not even close.
No, it's awful. And look, with respect to climate change, I'm not insensitive to the fact that it would be good if we stopped polluting so much. It would be good to stop throwing garbage in the oceans, just indiscriminately sort of shitting where we eat. This is not a good policy, but how is that going to happen by locking people in their cities and all the rest? Obviously, it's a recipe for violence. Political violence, trade wars, right? You see more and more of that, the old saying, right? When goods stop crossing borders, soldiers start. The possibility of a cyber attack, energy crisis, terrorist attacks, AI displacing jobs. Trucking is the biggest single employment for most people in middle America. Over 1 million truckers. What happens if those trucks get automated by AI? Natural disasters, immigration crisis. I was in Mexico recently watching streams of people from all over the world just walk north toward the border. How long is that going to continue?
And that's a super important point, that it's not Mexicans. On net, from Mexico to the U.S. and U.S. to Mexico, the immigration is going from U.S. to Mexico.
Net outflow. That's exactly right. Yep.
People are coming through Mexico from Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Venezuela, there's Argentina. There's some people coming from like Latin America in general, but the majority of people, or a plurality maybe, are coming from not South America and Latin America.
Yeah. And listen, I mean, I wrote about this recently. I was in Guatemala at my place in the mountains there last year, year and a half ago, 2022, something like that. And I took a ride with a taxi driver who talked to me about what was happening in the US with respect to the two very polarized sides, gunning up and getting ready to go at each other. And I asked him, I said, how is it that you know so much about what's going on in the US? He said, because that's exactly how the Civil War happened in Guatemala. Now, most people don't notice, but from 1960 to 1996, there was massive genocide in Guatemala. This is pre-ubiquitous 24/7 media, so it's not like everybody back then had a direct TV station that was covering all the people that were being slaughtered in Guatemala. This was a big, big deal, and the peace accords were signed very shortly before I got there in 1999. Accords were signed in 96, and so there was people alive who went through a lot of the Civil War down there. And this 70-plus-year-old gentleman driving a taxi is quoting me exactly how a civil war starts. And he said, listen, I'm telling you exactly what's coming in the U.S. We've seen it. We already know where that leads.
What were the factors that he saw as the prerequisite to a civil war that it parallels today?
Constant bickering. One of the things that you see that's really, really troubling to me at any rate, and I think to anybody who's traveled and seen enough of the world, people say things publicly, and social media obviously has created a forum where all of this can take place. You see people intentionally saying the most inflammatory, most hurtful, most instigating comments they can possibly come up with toward the other side. And, oh, I'll get a gun and shoot you, and this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, how long before that boils over into, okay, I'm calling you bluff, do it. Or somebody, what typically happens, obviously, is that somebody says, okay, well, the danger of something bad happening to me is so great, I now need to act preemptively. That's when the war begins. We have a justification to go kill them before they kill us, right? That's typically how these things go. The Guatemalan government extinguished and exterminated entire villages. In the last 20 years, they've still turned up bodies from places that were just bulldozed over, right? Killed everybody and buried them and tried to make it all go away. But of course, it never does. And the kind of effect that that has on a psyche of the people there was really something to behold.
People gloss over what a war looks like, and it's not pretty. People laugh and joke about, oh, there's a civil war coming in the United States, or we're already in a civil war. And I mean, in some ways, I understand what they're talking about. Things are extremely tense. People are going a little crazy. But at the same time, your everyday life is very normal in the United States right now. But it could tip over. There is no guarantee that this society we've built is going to last. In fact, we know because we're an empire, it's almost destined to collapse at some point. I don't know if the US could be the one empire that somehow survived.